Good afternoon. I hope you don't mind if I don't stand at the podium, but I really don't like the podium. I'm a teacher that teaches high school and move around a lot, so I might do that at this point. But one of the things that I have noticed over the past 5-6 years is that all my students have cell phones, and they like them a lot. And I have two options. I can either fight them every day and yell at them and tell them to put their phone away and scream and fight that battle all day, or I can use them. And so I kind of made the decision to use them. And so there are other battles that I would rather fight in my classroom beyond cell phones and texting and all of the other fun things that we've got. And so, good. So instead, I've decided that it's a way for me to bridge the gap between myself and my students when it comes to having conversations in my classroom. And that I love primary sources, and I think that they are amazing, but at the same time, they have to be able to engage with those primary sources. And so I wanted to use technology as a way to get my students to truly engage in using those primary sources in the classroom. And so it might have worked. Might have, okay. So one of the things that I've started this year, and I started with a friend of mine who teaches over at Mullen High School. Barb Fig has been teaching for a while, and she has mentored me through the last several years since I became a teacher. And so she and I came up with this idea this year over the summer that we would have our students read the same book for AP US Government. We both teach AP US Government. We both teach it to a mixture of kids, mostly sophomores this year for her, and all sophomores for me. And so they are currently reading Howard Feynman's 13 American Arguments. And so we had decided that they were going to read this book together, and we said, that's great. And what do we do with it now that they're reading it at the same time? And so what we created was a blog that the students can use. And so I did a poll with my students at the beginning of the year to find out how many of them had computers at home, internet access at home, smartphones that could, or some kind of electronic device that could connect to Wi-Fi. And what I found out was that if I add it all up, 100% of my students have access to technology somehow, whether it's through their phone or whether it's at home, they have access to some sort of internet. And so what we created was the Mullen Overland High School homepage. And so you're welcome to go on here, and you will find that we did not go in order in our chapters. We actually ordered the chapters by the units that we teach. And so if you go in, you'll find there's one overachieving student who has done the assignment that's due on Sunday already. Awesome. But you'll find on Sunday, you'll find about 180 more of those up there, because it's due by Sunday night. For my kids, I'm not sure when Barb's are due, but they're relatively close together. And actually, Taylor, if you want to go down and click where it says 175 comments for chapter 1. So this is what they are doing. We will put up a question at the top of, and the students have to respond to that question, and Barb and I we talk to each other about which question we want to use, and then we have our students go in and reply to it. This particular one, they actually had to find a current event that dealt with the chapter was on who was a person, and so Howard Feynman discusses the change of who a person is in the United States over time. And so we talked about who is and is not a person in the United States today, and they all had to find a current event that dealt with that. And so that's the link that you see there at the bottom. Not only did they have to respond to the question, but they had to reply to each other's arguments. And so what you get is a very large group of students. Between the two of us, you're looking at about 100 students that are responding to a question based on a book, but not only that, but they are pulling in primary sources, and they're responding to each other and having that conversation. And so for us, that's really, really important for them to have that conversation, especially when we talk about government and all of the fun and exciting things going on in government. Actually today, starting at about 10 o'clock. It should be very exciting. So if you go back to the PowerPoint for me. So that's kind of one way for us to have both inter and intra communications, because I have 2 classes of AP Government, so they talk to each other and they talk to students at another school. I have colleagues that have done this with people in different countries, in different states, et cetera. If you can find somebody, your students get a whole new perspective that they may or may not get sitting just in your classroom. So the other thing that it allows for my students to do is to have some sort of reflection. And it allows for them to reflect on their own work. And so in this particular case, my students keep their own websites, and I use a wiki for it because it's a lot easier for them to do it. And so if you click on Alyssa's, Alyssa loves history and probably should have been in AP because she's such an incredibly brilliant kid, but she has a lot of other AP classes, and so she decided she was going to take regular US history, and that's where this comes from. And so I ask them every time we do a project to go through and to blog as they're going through, and some of them blog all at the last minute. I know they're high school kids, that's what they do. But I also find that they really kind of give me some things that I need to look at as far as both my teaching and what they're learning. So it's a way for them to reflect on what they are learning as they go through this process. And it's also a way for me to reflect on the things that I have taught them. And so you can go through and you can tell that she had a hard time with figuring out APA and Chicago style. So I knew I had to go back and reteach how to use something other than MLA when it came to resources. And I replied to her underneath there so I can go through and reply to her on things. And she kind of makes me laugh as she goes through stuff. She talks a lot in her blogs. Hers are a lot longer than other people's, but she really gives me a lot of insight into what she's thinking as she's going and what's hard and what's not. And it allows me to go back and say, this is something I need to explain better, or this is something that they need more work on. And so it's a way for reflection for both them and for me. So you can flip back. Taylor gets to flip back and forth between the websites and the PowerPoint presentation. So the next thing would be the things that students can share with you. And this is something that I picked up actually just a few months ago at a conference. And I said, I want to try this. And so my poor kids get to be guinea pigs a lot. And so I wanted to try Evernote. And I have Evernote, and I use it all the time. How many of you use Evernote? Okay. Love Evernote. Did not realize just how cool this was going to be until I started getting stuff in a few days ago for my students. And so if you click on the Evernote event notebooks, which you will find, is that I had my students go through, and I do current events for AP Government so that they have some idea about what's going on in the world, otherwise they won't. And so I had my students go through and find some current events, 2 or 3 a week, to put together. And so if you take a look at it, what you will find is that my students were able to share it on Evernote, because what I did not want to do is carry home 56 notebooks full of current events. Please don't make me carry it. I don't want to deal with it. My office and my classroom are not in the same place, and my back can't take it, and I'm not that old, so I can't imagine later on how this is going to go. So they have all shared with me their current event notebooks. And so this is Kabram's notebook. And so on Evernote, they were able to go through and actually they have a little web clipper thing. They will clip the entire article into it, and then if you scroll down on it, what you will find is that they are able to do all of their analysis within the article. And so they're able to go in and then to share the notebook with me. And so I had to kind of walk the students through how they share it with me. But now the only thing that I have to carry home is either my laptop or my iPad, and I have it on both. And so if you have the app for your iPad, which is why I brought it up, but if you have the app on your iPad, you can download Evernote. And what you will find when you go to download it is that all of the notebooks for all the students will pop up on your iPad. And so I can get everything that they've shared with me on my iPad, and it's fantastic. And I can see all of their notes, so I can see their progress through it. And I don't have to worry about carrying any of it home. They can't forget it. Their dog can't have eaten their homework. None of it. And so it kind of gets rid of the excuses. And I found some of my students are like, well, I don't have a computer at home. But they have an iTouch, and they can do this on their iTouch. They go, I don't have a smartphone. I go, great. And they go, but I have a computer at home. And it's perfect. And so that works out really well. They think it's fairly neat because they don't have to bring anything in or forget any things. And I think it's great because it's going to make it a whole lot easier for me to take a look at current events. You have a question? Can they see each other's? If they were to share it with each other, yes. So all they have to do is you right-click on it and click share and type in the email address of the person you want to share it with. What I did have to make sure they did is when they went through here that they didn't share each and every article with me, because I got like 18 emails from one kid where they shared each article. I'm like, oh boy. So then I had to go back and show everybody how to share just the notebook itself, which is not too difficult, but it's just a right click. Or if they've got their phone, there's a little share button at the top of their notebook. And so this is something that I have just discovered that is fantastic. And I really get a chance to see their stuff without having tons and tons of paperwork to grade as a result. So The next thing is the use of wikis, and you saw a little bit of it with the reflection piece with the blog, but I also use their wikis as an electronic portfolio. And I think that that's important because it allows me to see their growth over time with, again, not having tons of binders or something that I'm trying to keep track of all the time or the kids are trying to keep track of and losing. And so I make them do it by student ID number so that they create their wikis through student ID number, and then they just share it with me. And I use PBWorks because I think it's a lot easier for the students to use because it works a lot like Microsoft Word. So actually, if you'll click on Kayla's, Kayla is just about the quietest kid that you'll ever meet. She's super sweet and really quiet in class, and she just started talking this semester. I was very excited. And she's really into American Indian history. And she thinks that that's pretty much the best thing. She did a National History Day project on it and qualified for state. I was very excited. So she gets to go to state on the massacre at Wounded Knee for it. But she also gets to go through and create her website. And this is hers. She maintains it. I simply go through and grade it. And so the front page, I had asked the students to all find a primary source picture through the Library of Congress. And I asked them to tell me why this picture represents U.S. history to you. And so that was kind of her explanation as to why it represented U.S. history to her. And so it allows me to go through, and they do portfolio projects, so it's almost an assessment as we go through each unit. So they are currently working on a World War II one. They just did a Great Depression one. They can make these public or private. So if you ever have an issue with, I'm concerned about, my school doesn't allow things to be in public, this is a fantastic way. They can make them private, and they share them just with you, and no one but you or them would have access to that. And so the other thing that I do, if you'll flip back to the PowerPoint for me, is that I do a flipped classroom. In my AP class, we have a ton of content to cover. And those of you who teach AP know that it's a ridiculous amount of content. And it's not as much fun as it should be because these are super high-achieving kids, and they have a passion for what you're teaching usually, and you're there trying to stuff as much content into their heads as you can, and you don't get to have as much fun. And so what I did over the last year and a half is I have flipped my classroom. And they do all of their notes and all of their readings at home so that everything that happens in my classroom is discussion-based, and or we can have all kinds of different activities that they can do in class where they're actually working with that material rather than me giving that material and them trying to figure it out at home. They have the material at home, and they come in and we can figure it out together. And it has really increased the achievement of even my higher achieving students. And they did significantly better on the AP exam than my previous year when I flipped to this. And so it's gone very, very well. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit, Taylor, if you click on AP US Government, okay, everything, all of their notes are on here. Everything that we're going to do for the class period is on here for an entire unit at a time. So I do one unit, and so they know when everything is due. If I make changes, I put it in bright red because then they know that that's something that's a due date that's changed. And so they'll go down through and all their readings so they can read stuff at home and come in, and we can have a Socratic discussion about it, or we can have a conversation. And that tends to go much, much better than me giving them a reading in class and asking them to read it and then discuss it right away. They haven't had a chance to process it. And I know that I go through things and I will read something and someone will go, great, what do you think? And I go, I have no idea what I think about it yet, and I need to process it for a while. I come to conferences like this and I hear all this information and I have to go home and process everything that I've gotten. And I want my students to be able to do that as well. I want them to be able to process information before they come in. And so I've been able to use a wiki to really flip my classroom the other direction and have them get the information at home and have a chance to process it before we come in and do stuff. And I am about 3 weeks ahead of where I was 2 years ago in my AP class. So I'm actually got an extra 3 weeks to do stuff with them that I didn't have. Yeah?
Did you say that you actually give the kids a link to the notes, or do they still need to lead through the readings and learn those note-taking skills?
The notes are all on PowerPoint that I put up on here, but there's also readings. And so the textbook reading, it tells them what pages they have to have done by which time. And that's something I added because I found out that they were reading the textbook the day before the test, not doing so well, so I broke it up for them on that one. But I give them the PowerPoint notes so they can, if they want to print off the PowerPoint and bring it into class to discuss, that's fine. Some of them just take the notes at home on a piece of paper, and so they go through the PowerPoint themselves and they come in with questions on it. And so that way they have a chance to figure out what they do and don't understand before they come in, and I don't have to quite feel like I'm stuffing them full of information. So, but everything is up here ahead of time. So the other thing is I have a lot of students that are involved in a ton of extracurricular activities. And so if they know that they have a game coming up the night before, it gives them a chance to do stuff ahead of time. And also if they're sick or they're gone for field trips, because these kids are going to be gone for field trips a lot, they have all the materials so they know what they have due and when. So it's really cut back on the amount of issues that they have with getting stuff turned into me. So any other questions before I move on, or are we good? Okay. So the last thing is kind of the other sets of tools that I have. And so there are a million technology tools out there. And I have gone to as many different presentations as I could find to find the tools, but I can't use all of them. There are so many, and if I try and use too many with my students, they get overwhelmed, I get overwhelmed, and eventually I just kind of stop. And I don't want to use it anymore, and we'll just sit in class and I will hand them the paper and make them read it. And so I've really had to cut down on the number of tools that I use. And instead what I've done is really try to use the ones that work the best really well and get the students used to using them and really kind of delve into how they work. And so I just put a couple up here. There's a Twitter that I use in class, and I didn't sign into my account just because I know you guys have yours signed in. But I do have the students go through on Twitter, and I have a little hashtag, which is @Mrs. Jones-Wagy. So I will give them a primary source in class, and I will ask them to tweet what they're thinking. And so, you know the little sticky note thing where they do their primary sources and they put all their sticky notes up on the board and you go through them all? I replace sticky notes with Twitter. And so that way they can go through and tweet what they're thinking and what they're observing on Twitter, and it just engages them more in what we're doing. And they get to have their phones out, and they're really excited about this. I go, okay, pull out your phones. And they go, really? And I go, okay, we're going to go to Twitter. And they go, oh, my goodness. And some of them are like, this is so cool. And some tell me they hate Twitter. And I say, that's okay. And so not all of them have a Twitter account, and they share in groups, and that's just fine. And you make it work for whatever your population is. Using the @ symbol I have found makes it more private than the hashtag. If you hashtag, anybody can see it. The @ symbol, only I can see it. So I can put the Twitter feed up on the board, and they can see what they've tweeted at me, but nobody else could go and find the things that they've done. So they couldn't find my students really with the @ symbol. So it's a little easier to maintain that way, but the @ symbol never goes away. The hashtag will go away after a certain period of time. @ symbol never goes away. Learned that one the hard way. So you can't get rid of that one. SoundGecko is something that I have discovered, which is fantastic for my students, especially I have students who have dyslexia and some serious reading differentiation issues when it comes to grade level. Even though I might teach 10th and 11th grade, they are definitely not reading at a 10th or 11th grade level. SoundGecko will let you import pretty much anything from a website, PDFs, and it reads it out loud to you and allows you to view it at the same time, and it's an app. And I tried to get it to pull up on the computer correctly, and it doesn't quite pull up on the computer right for SoundGecko, but I have a student this year that I gave it to him, and he pulls all of his current events off of and puts it into SoundGecko, and it reads it to him as he's reading through. And he said it's cut down on the amount of time it takes him to get through current events a whole lot in comparison to what it was taking him before. And so I have done that. TED Talks, which I love to use, which is why I kind of like this conference. And so I will find different TED Talks on political and on politics and things like that. The students then go through, and I can tell them to go on. There's an app for TED Talks now that lets you search. So if you wanted to use the app it goes on Android and Apple products, and you go in and you download TED Talks, and you can find the short ones. And I can ask my students to find those. And then my homework, I gave to my students this year as just an app for them because it allows them to put in different classes, and it allows them to actually put their homework in there for them. So any students that have trouble with remembering stuff, especially when their homework assignments are due, they've used the My Homework app. So, and I'm out of time, so I've got to stop. But if you have any questions, feel free to find me afterwards, unless you have any very fast ones right now. Other than that, I'll be here after we're done today. So thank you very much.